What I would just like to understand, how did JIC's view of the Sunni and Shia insurgency in Baghdad and the surrounding areas develop over this period?
Well, we are taking the end of 2005 forward. I think the thing that we saw was, first, if I can reel back slightly, we spent a lot of time trying to decide who is the biggest threat. Is it the jihadists, who became ultimately centered around al-Qaeda in Iraq, al-Zarqawi subsequently? Is it the Sunni nationalists? We were sure it wasn't the Ba'athis. But then there was also the question of the Shia insurgents, and the Shia insurgents, we could park them on one side. So as between the jihadists and the Sunni nationalists, which were the biggest threat, throughout 2004, and again 2005, we were pretty consistently saying that the Sunni nationalists were the long-term threat. They had the biggest support. The jihadists were a minority. Quite a lot of them were foreign fighters. They had the ability, through their suicide bombings, to have a disproportionate impact, but ultimately what we needed to address was the alienated Sunnis. That had a direct feed into policy because there was a lot of policy attention given to how do we split the nationalists away from the jihadists, how do we drive a wedge between them such that we engage with the nationalists, isolate the jihadists. The jihadists, we took the view, could not be reconciled. Certainly that was the J.I.C. view. There would be a hardcore of the nationalists who would not be reconciled, but the bulk of them, we said, if we can demonstrate that there is a place for them in the future Iraqi politics, then we may be able to draw them in. That went through 2005. But as we moved into 2006, and particularly after the Golden Mosque bombing and the wave of sectarian violence that started, we began to become certainly more pessimistic. It seemed to us that far from driving the nationalists apart from the jihadists, actually they were being driven together. So it seemed to us that the trends were all in the wrong direction, and there was a period. In addition to our J.I.C. papers, I think you will have seen, we were putting out a weekly intelligence note which went particularly to number 10. It was something that the Prime Minister asked for, a weekly pack of material on Iraq, and we had an intelligence note in that. For a long time we would start that off with a summary of attack statistics. And I think early in 2006 we said we are going to stop giving you this weekly summary. Partly that was because every time it dipped in a week, people would become quite excited and say things are getting better, and actually that was not a good picture, not a straightforward picture. So instead of giving a weekly summary of attack statistics, we started giving a broader brush, more strategic look, and the picture that we had was you did get occasional plateaus, but there would then always be another rise in the level of violence from a higher baseline, if you like. The underlying trend. And we did put that into a J.I.C. paper eventually, in quite a telling graph that showed that the underlying trend of violence was always up. Then, as I say, after the Golden Mosque bombing, the violence became more explicitly sectarian. We had started making reference to risks of sectarian conflict, I think, much earlier. I think actually even before the end of 2004, the JIC started to refer to sectarian violence. But nevertheless the Shia were extraordinarily restrained, actually, through 2004 and 2005. But then after the Golden Mosque bombing, the jam really was let off the leash and the violence became much more explicitly sectarian. That was another problem actually that we had with the statistics. The statistics came from the M.N.F., and they tended to underestimate the degree of sectarian and civilian casualties. So it was another reason why we decided to stop using them.
Why were the Shia restrained? Do you know any reason why they were restrained?
Well, I think one reason was their religious leadership, Sistani in particular. Consistently we saw him as a force for restraint. He was anti-sectarian. That didn't mean he was not pro-Shia. He had a very firm view that the Shia had the right to rule Iraq. But he was quite firm that he wanted a united Iraq, that he did see the Sunnis and the Kurds. As part of the future Iraq, and he was very concerned himself with the risk of sectarianism. so that was a restraint.
He didn't directly talk to any of the foreigners.
No, our embassy tried to talk to him from time to time, and he was quite firm that he wouldn't. I think he might have seen Brahimi at one point,